one of the things that, and I think we've kind of like making allusions to this, but you guys made a post not long ago, where you kind of outlined the top three or four arguments that we keep seeing, in favor of all these changes that WotC made. And I don't know if you guys want to like expound on these for a minute, but the first one, and if you read them, like it seems like they're all kind of the same thing, just stated in a different way. But
Yeah.
you don't have to use it at your table. That's
Yeah, and I mean, fair enough. Fair enough. You don't. Um, but we are kind of engaged in creating a culture at the same time. And D&D is a relic. It's a beautiful culture that's kind of compiled its content over decades. And fair enough, you don't have, nor should you tie your identity to a corporation. But
Right.
at the same time, there's nothing that should prevent you from voicing discontent over one of the biggest names in your favorite hobby. And definitely everyone's table is different, but it also influences what, like I was saying before, what new players would expect entering the hobby, or what's acceptable at conventions. So it goes beyond your own table, and it's just something that I guess we want to continue. I mean, we want the hobby to progress in a positive way, but not at the expense of jettisoning a whole bunch of content. I just don't think that's the way to go forward with it.
from my perspective, once we get through all four of these uh, arguments, I I when I read that you don't have to use it at your table, if let's say WotC chose not to make any course corrections with lore, and terminology, and they didn't use the sensitivity readers, I would say the same thing. You don't have to use it at your table. Like,
Exactly.
It goes both ways.
yeah. So the next one you guys talked about, it's not hurting anyone, so what's the big deal?
Yeah, and I mean that goes back to comfort, right? Is this something that we're striving for, or are we striving for something like an edge of your seat kind of experience? Um, Also, who are we talking about when we're saying it doesn't hurt anyone? It's definitely making a section of the hobby very uncomfortable, um, or else there wouldn't be the kind of firestorm that there is in the hobby. So if it's not hurting anyone, then why do we see this kind of backlash against it?
Yeah, can I add to that? Like, I think one of the, maybe I'll just preface it with any moral judgment anyone in the world makes is usually based on perception of harm. So when you see judgments coming out either direction, it's because people think something harmful is going on. So the hurting anyone is tricky because the harms can sometimes be more immediate or less immediate, and they can also be more obvious and out there or less obvious and out there. So I think I gave a stupid example on our story on Instagram, but like if you were having a kid's birthday party and some person enters the birthday party and says, "Well, you can't be eating cake because it was a symbol of the aristocracy in the during the French Revolution," like you ruined the kid's birthday party. It's like these kind of problematizing everything, politicizing everything, it does change the atmosphere at the table. It changes the atmosphere in the hobby. And yeah, it's hard to like point to exact moment and say, yeah, it affected that thing right there. But everyone feels it. It's making people walk on eggshells. It's changing the type of stories that are making it to press when it comes to our official campaigns that are coming out. So yeah, some harms I think are just more obvious than others, but I definitely don't think no harm's being done by these shifts. I think there's definitely something happening.
Yeah, I
That's
think
such a great example. I really like the birthday cake. That's a
yeah.
great example.
Yeah, it's the rule of unintended consequences, or the because I would look at that and going back to the first argument where I said, if we left everything the same, it's not hurting anyone. So what's the big deal? People would say, well, having that word slavery in there would make someone uncomfortable, and that's going to hurt them. Or you're encouraging genocide when you have orcs going through and massacring everything. But you could also flip that on its head and say, if like I were scared of spiders, for example, what's the treatment for that? The treatment is exposure to
Exposure.
spiders, right? And so I don't see like keeping people sheltered as doing them any good, you know?
Well, and
And
to add on to that, Matt, I would argue that having these types of situations actually increases empathy. It increases one's ability to start thinking of things from a different perspective. It's like, oh, I don't give a crap about these types of people. Oh, well, hang on. It's kind of weird when it's this village. I kind of give a crap. Well, maybe I do give a crap about this group of people.
yeah, a good DM will try to paint a complete picture, and sure
Yeah.
there are DMs and whole groups out there. They're only interested in crushing their enemy and seeing them driven before you. But that's fine. That's how they want to play the game. But I guess my point is, and a retort to what I said would be, well, it's not D&D's place to be a therapist, you know. Um, but the I no, I don't think it's anybody's place to be a therapist except for licensed therapists. But I think that once you start talking about words as actual assault, like physical assault, I think you've kind of gone off the deep end. You've jumped the shark. You got Fonzie's jacket on and the water skis on. Uh, and it just that argument just doesn't hold any weight to me.
I
But
think Dungeons and Dragons is a great way to explore some traumatic things in a person's life in a controlled environment. And I think it's a great way to explore some things that you wouldn't or shouldn't do in real life, but in a fantasy type of environment where in reality, there's not any consequences to a bad roll or a bad decision. And now you can kind of explore these bad rolls and bad decisions in a safe way.
Totally. And it's also like I don't know who these players are that have this sanitized version of D&D. I definitely know at my table, I'm like, holy crap, you want to do that?
Yeah.
Like they'll be like, no, we have to kill everyone in the village. Sorry, I have a dog with a dog toy beside me. One second.
it's all
Yeah,
good.
no, that's not a real D&D table.
And in 40 plus years of me DMing, well, GMing more than just D&D, but in 40 plus years, and I've run countless conventions, probably DM'd for hundreds, if not thousands of players. I've had one person in that all that time say, I'm not comfortable with that. And it was an adventure where there were lots of spiders. And the person saying, I'm not comfortable with that wasn't even a player. They were just somebody like watching. And I'm like, then you'll probably want to go somewhere else because this whole adventure is about stopping these spiders. So, yeah. Um, and that's really like, and that's really like, if you go to any convention, you're going to sign up on their list, and there is a synopsis of the adventure or whatever event you're doing, and it's it if you are frightened of spiders and you see in the synopsis that there are going to be spiders, you don't sign up for that. You don't go in there and say, I demand that it be changed. You know. Anyway, but yeah, it's when you ask the question, who are these players? I mean, I've got a lot, obviously anecdotal, because there's been millions of sessions played where I wasn't there, but I feel like I've got a good cross section traveling, going to different conventions in different states and whatnot. And yeah, I just don't see it. But all right, next one. If you don't like it, play something else. This is my favorite one.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that's always kind of the go-to, hey? Like it's we want to be part of your community. And then oh, your community is doing something wrong and it needs to be fixed. And then oh, you don't like what is going on in your community, then go somewhere else. And it's rinse and repeat. And that's not it's a hollow argument because we're all very invested in our hobby or we wouldn't be here. And so it's oversimplifying things. I mean, we've got a lot of investment in it. D&D has a huge influence over the RPG ecosystem, and it's just way too simple. I mean, we're not going to go anywhere, and the fact that we're exercising our voice and critiquing what's going on in no way kind of that's not a solution. If you're unhappy with something, you want to change it, then why don't you go somewhere else? Well, no, I mean, this is exactly what is going on in the ecosystem right now. They're not happy with dryads being female or whatever, succubuses
Eggs.
being female. It's like they're they're changing that. So like our response is, well, that's a bit silly. You might want to rethink that. Our response is not go somewhere else and create a new game. So it's a bit of a hollow argument.
I totally agree with that. I um I don't know why, this is just how I'm wired, but anything with a that I'm a intimately active with that has a legacy. I care about preserving that legacy. And so, for example, I'm a big baseball fan. And of course, baseball has this huge legacy. And really RPGs does too, because we can track RPGs back to, the 60s, and they're basically the very first Bronsteins, the first instances of role play. And so when they say, why don't you play something else? It's because I care about the legacy of D&D. I care that it's a good game, or at least a playable game, and
Right.
I care that um, and this is another love of mine, which is mythology. So you're bringing up dryads, and we know that hags are getting the same treatment. Succubi can be any gender they want to be. That was another one. And I'm kind of like, well, that isn't the history. That is not the mythology, which all of these creatures were based upon. And so there are, what's interesting is that, like, with the Medusa back in second edition, they had a male version of Medusa, but they didn't call it Medusa. They called it something completely else, something else, which is cool,
Right.
Um,
That makes
and
more sense.
so when I see them messing with this legacy, and they're coming out and straight up saying we're going to be changing the lore. Um, I have a problem with that. It's like retconning things that are meaningful to me. I'm going to push back against that. And you could say, well, why don't you play something else? Well, something else isn't that thing that I've been playing for 40 plus years.
Right. That's
yeah.
exactly it.
Uh,
It's also this thing where I don't know. It seems to particularly be happening around sometimes people call them sapiens or sentient creatures, but there seems to be this belief that the moment something has language, it needs to be morally complicated in order for it to be good lore or interesting. And I think people misunderstand that when you look at like the old Celtic myths of Europe, or even what the Dutch thought, or these different areas, Fomorians and Fae and fairies and goblins, these were part of nature. It was a representation of this unwieldy unknown that you had to mythically engage with. And it wasn't meant to be complicated per se. Like, it was meant to be like in the same way that if you see a grizzly bear in the woods, you run. If you see a pack of goblins in the wood, you run. But I don't know why that shift has occurred. It seems to be now that the moment any of these entities in the game can use language and have a culture, that culture must be capable of being all things. So yeah, I don't know why that shift has occurred, but it seems to be what's going on with the succubi, the hag, the goblins, the
Orcs.
right? Yeah.
I
The
think
orcs
it's
have
got.
to have feelings.
Gnolls.
I think it has to. It's kind of by extension. They have to like they've made this argument with certain creatures, and for that argument to hold water, it must extend to all these others. Um, and otherwise, the argument
Right.
is bunk, right? And it's easily laughed at. But um, yeah, I definitely think that it's a snowball that will never stop rolling if they continue down this path. Because
Yeah.
it'll naturally extend to everything, and why are you using a longsword? That's a Eurocentric sword. We can't have that. We better call it just a sword. Well, not all cultures use swords. The South American tribes, they use spears. So, we
Yeah.
can't have swords in the game.
It's almost the like the caricature, the actually, like the glasses person, right? Like, it's, I don't know where that's from, but yeah, it's these corrections that there's an exception somewhere. So you must be aware of the exception, and you need to build your lore around these exceptions. And it's funny because you see it in pop culture too. Like, I think the newest three Star Wars movies, right? Finn is the good stormtrooper, and we had Drizzt, of course, and there's that's existed forever. This kind of idea that you can get an exception. But what's funny to me is that idea, no one had a problem with it. But what's kind of taken over now is that it's a correction. You have to correct everyone. So if there's just a group of goblins, you need to make sure that that person understands that that's just one bad group of goblins. There's good goblins out there. So it's this very rigid kind of corrective structure that people are putting on their dungeon masters and other players. And I think just people have no, or from my perspective, people have no appetite for being nitpicked and corrected and constantly reminded of various viewpoints. Like, people are like, I'm here to play a game. I just want to chuck some dice and tell a story.
Exactly. Amen.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. And I guess that kind of leads into, before I go on down the road I was going to go down, to like your last point, or the last argument that you guys discussed, and that's with what's wrong with making the game safe and comfortable for everyone. And I always have a real problem with the word safe. What is safe? Um,
Right. Well, life isn't safe, right? And when you're talking about in a therapeutic environment, the number one thing is to not give someone a false narrative and reinforce their um, maybe inconsistent thinking. And this obsession with safety is doing just that. It's reinforcing a false narrative where the real life isn't safe. Playing an RPG is, well, ideally it should be safe because it's imaginary, but for a lot of people, things come up, and yeah, you can't avoid that. You can't be live in a bubble.
Yeah, and that it's kind of related to number two, which was it's not hurting anyone, is basically the same argument, just reworded in a different way. And, you know, I my response to this immediately when I was reading your original post a few days ago, like I read this line and the first thing that popped in my head was, what's wrong with making the game fun? You know? So what they're talking about is probably making the game safe and comfortable for less than 1% of the gaming population. Maybe it's a little more. Maybe it's even a full percentage. But I can't imagine that there are very many people out there who legitimately will drop on the ground in the fetal position and have thoughts of suicide because somebody used the word civilization, or because the Underdark is a terrible place.
Well, one thing that they teach you in therapy is people who have gone through traumatic experiences. One of the things they teach you in therapy is how to cope with that. Because unfortunately, fortunately, we live in a world where just because you had this horrible traumatic experience, like that sucks, but the world doesn't change for you and it doesn't adjust for you. And so part of going to therapy is learning how to adjust your trauma in this chaotic world. And it's the same thing in every aspect of that world. So maybe they are catering this game to that 1%, but I would say that they're doing that 1% a huge disservice by doing that, because all that does is create this safe bubble where everyone else has to cater to them, and the expectation is that everyone in the world will then cater to them as well, and they don't learn how to cope with these traumas in a safe fictionalized fairy tale like environment.
So
I
true.
love that. Oops.
And I think it also, like, one of the features of generalized anxiety disorder, for instance, is that it's almost like you're gradually becoming braver or you're gradually becoming more fragile depending on the steps you're taking in your life. And generalized anxiety disorder can get to the point that a person can't leave their room, right? Because what's happening is they're reinforcing the belief that everything in their environment is a threat, versus challenging those beliefs about what should register as a threat and how to approach threats in their environment. So yeah, I think it's worrisome at a deep level that one of the better tools that we have out there, which is imagination, right? It's our ability to dream and to play with hypotheticals. That this capacity for us to say, okay, I wonder what would happen if I was a warrior, if I was challenging a dragon. We all have dragons in our own life, whether it's the boss you don't want to talk to or the friend you're having an argument with. What if our response to that is, no, no, like I need you to change that because that doesn't fit what I'm ready for right now. So I don't think that paradigm can succeed. I think we need to go back to, I'm responsible for making myself a robust, anti-fragile individual who's going to be in the world and be ready for curveballs because they're coming.